Buyers found that in the inspection, there's been issues that they wanted to rectify and they want the seller to pay for it. Can we do this or not?
It's a great question. And for answering it, I'm going to assume that you have a subject to inspection in this deal. One of the things to think about is kind of how reasonable the issue is for the buyer to be concerned about. As an example, finding out that the roof on a 30-year-old house is 30 years old
Mhm.
is really not something that they needed an inspection to find out. No one told them the roof was new. It was expected. That's a bit different than finding out a surprising thing, something that we didn't know about the inspector has discovered in this. So keep that in mind. So yes, it's possible, but obviously conversations need to happen with the buyer as to what's reasonable to ask for.
Let me switch gears in the notion that if you get on side that there's valid things that need to be followed through to the seller based on buyer's legal instructions. Start with the conversation to explore the idea with the listing agent to see where the seller might land on this discussion. It's a discussion. It's not reopening negotiations. And then if you get a favorable response, then you may land up putting pen to paper with an addendum to address the issue. Now, we have some language that is intended not to reopen the contract so that if at the time of putting it into writing it fails, then you're still protected. You've got a contract. But ideally, when we go back to the conversation that Corey was having with the buyer on correctly positioning this thing, one of the buyer's choices are if the seller doesn't make the required, they're not required. Let's be clear. A seller is never required to go back and make the changes and fixes. But if they're not agreeable to it, then a buyer can walk, or they could choose to just go ahead as long as you keep your options open. And that's why we have a conversation with the seller to explore the idea. Your thoughts, Allison?
Yeah, and I think if the buyer was a little bit wanted some comfort, definitely the buyer's agent could write the addendum for the seller to sign first, saying that they agree to do these things or agree to reduce the purchase price. You could also make sure if you were doing a couple of things at once that until the language not to reopen the contract, that until both parties agree to execute this contract, nothing really changes. The contract's not changing if you had to kind of go back and forth a little bit on that. So, yeah,
Can I jump in with the last part?
sure.
I think there might be some amongst the listing agent community that would be cautious against perhaps some buyer or buyer agent's philosophy of don't worry too much about getting this offer accepted. Let's just get them in paper on an agreement. We'll renegotiate the terms prior to subject removal. And I'd like to think that we are not supportive of that. And that as a listing agent, if you've got concerns when the offer comes in, there are qualifiers that you could put in your counteroffer back to the buyer on laying out those reasonable expectations that Corey spoke about on what would constitute grounds for not removing the subject. I love the example. It's a 30-year-old roof. You knew that when you came in. We negotiated based on a 30-year-old roof. I'm not here to reopen that conversation. But I'm open to things that take us all by surprise and need to be considered.
Please keep these questions coming. We love them. See you next time.